It says, "Vayitin Abraham et kol asher lo liYitzchak." When Yitzchak, following the path of his father, gave a blessing to his son Yaakov, he began with Yitain Lecha Elokim, the same Vayitain, using the same word Abraham, his father, used. Yitzchak concluded his blessing to Yaakov with the verb Vayikra, as it is written, Vayikra Yitzchak El Yaakov, Vayibarak Oto. And Yitzchak called out to Yaakov and he blessed him. So too, when Yaakov was ready to bless his sons, he decided to begin his blessings with the word where his father left off, as it is written, Vayikra Yaakov El Banav. Yaakov concluded his blessing to his sons with the word Vizot. Vizot Asher Diber Lahem Avihem. And Moshe Rabbeinu therefore began his final bracha to Bnei Israel with the word Vizot, as it is written, Vizot HaBracha Asher Barach Moshe. The Medrash continues. Moshe ended his blessing with the word Ashrecha Yisrael Mi Kamocha, and David HaMelech began his blessing with the word Ashrei Yishrei Techa in Tehillim. This is more than just a very cute Medrash. Each Avot began with the word where his predecessor left off. Obviously, the Medrash is teaching us something more than a simple play of words. What might that be? Sefer Bereshit is known as the Book of Avot. If we look at the breakdown of the Sefer, the coverage given to the three Avot is far from balanced. Abraham receives the Parashat Lech Lecha, Vayer, and Chayei Sarah. Yaakov receives Vayetze, Vayishlach, and Vayeshev. There's a bit of a digression in Vayeshev, in case regarding the story of Yosef and his brothers. But then in Vayigash and Vayefi, we are back to the story of Yaakov Avinu. So Abraham is the main feature of 3 Parashiyot, Yaakov more or less 6. However, Yitzchak barely gets 1 Pasha, Toldos. Even within this Pasha, we have just a few psukim that deal with the events in which Yitzchak plays the leading role. The point that we are coming to explain is not why Yitzchak seemingly gets very little publicity, but rather that we really do not know much about him. We know who Abraham is. We know him as the man of Chesed. We know him as the model of Mesirat Nefesh, who he successfully passed the 10 tests from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We link him with Chesed. Concerning Yaakov Avinu, we also have a good idea. He's the Ish Emet, the man of truth. He's the model of diligence in the study, the Ish Tam O Yoshev Ohalim. But who is Yitzchak? More importantly, what is his contribution to us? These are our avot. We know which personality, traits, and characteristics we derive from Abraham and Yaakov. But what attribute is it that Yitzchak has given to us? The true identity of Yitzchak Avinu is revealed in Pashat Vayetzeh, where Yaakov refers twice to his father as Pachad Yitzchak. The word Pachad means fear. What does the term Pachad Yitzchak mean? When we read the story of Pashat Toldot, one thing jumps out at us about Yitzchak. More than anything else, he wanted to replicate the life of Abraham Avinu. For instance, when there was a famine in Canaan, he went to Avimelech, Melech Plishtim, exactly what his father had done a generation earlier. In fact, when he was in Gerar, which Avimelech's capital, God appeared to him and told him, don't go down to Egypt. Now, why would Yitzchak have considered going down to Egypt? So Rashi tells us on the spot that his intent was to go down to Egypt, just as his father had done during the famine in his time. Yitzchak Avinu automatic reaction to any situation in life was, what would my father have done under these circumstances? This is the pattern by which he lived. I have to keep the tradition and the Masorah of my father. The Almighty knows this about Yitzchak, and therefore needed to intervene and tell him not to go down to Egypt as his father had done. This is Pachad Yitzchak. Yitzchak was afraid to deviate 1 iota from the path paved for him by his father Abraham. This tendency is clearly illustrated in the incident involving the wells. Yitzchak digs the very same wells originally dug by his father. Not only did he dig the same wells, he gave them the very same names. Why is this incident significant enough to be listed in the Torah? Why, indeed, is this one of the very few facts the Torah chooses to tell us about the life of Yitzchak Avinu? The answer is that this incident gives us the key to understanding the legacy of Yitzchak. His legacy is, I have to keep the tradition of my father. Throughout human history, sons and children don't want to keep the traditions of their fathers. My father's old-fashioned. That's where my father did things. I'm going to do things differently. Yitzchak did not fit into this mold. Yitzchak said, if my father dug wells, then I'm going to dig these same wells. I'm going to call them by the same names that my father called them. And Rabbi Bechaya in his parish says very strongly, those who follow through with this and keep the ways of their fathers. With this insight, we can now understand the Medrash. My father said the blessing with the word yitain. I too will bless my children with the word yitain. Yaakov too learned from his father. My father ended with the word vayikra. I am now going to begin the work with the word vayikra. And Moshe picked up from Yaakov with the word vizot. And David HaMelech picked up from Moshe with the word Ashrei. Each generation followed the tradition of their ancestors, keeping the Masorah of the fathers. This is what Pachad Yitzchak means. Yitzchak was the first of to be the son of a righteous father. Avraham Avinu did not have to deal with the issue of a righteous father who would pass on spiritual traditions to him. Avraham had to create his own spiritual path. But Yitzchak had tradition. He had a righteous father, and so the role he modeled for his children was Pachad Yitzchak, the fear and hesitancy to veer one iota off the spiritual course set for him by his righteous father. Keep the tradition of their parents. This is what Yitzchak is all about. One may ask, was not Yitzchak also innovative? The Rambam teaches us that he instituted the Mincha prayer and was the first to offer Maser. We see this in Hilchot Melachim. Upon further analysis, however, this is not an anomaly. Yitzchak's innovations were not creating new spiritual institutions. He merely reinforced innovations of his father because he felt that he needed some added spiritual activity to achieve the same level of spirituality that his father Abraham was able to attain without these innovations. Yitzchak did not say, my father prayed once a day, so it is enough that I pray once a day. He felt, I am not as good as my father, for my father sufficed to pray just once a day. On my lower level, I need to pray at least twice a day. Likewise, he felt, my father did not need to quantify his feelings of Hakaras HaTov to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it came to him naturally. I am now on his level, Yitzchak said. I must quantify my feelings of Hakaras HaTov. I will commit to take off Maser. All this, however, was in the context of Abraham's legacy. Ultimately, Yitzchak's basic essence was not one of innovation. It was one of following tradition. Pachad Yitzchak, keeping to the legacy of his father. To my family, I say that Dad has reached levels that we can only dream of reaching. And we need to be even more to reach those levels, because for him, he reached those levels naturally. Throughout this year, every decision I made, I would always ask myself, what would Dad have done? I became more conscious of certain things that he was. Cleaning up the shul, for example. I don't just take my siddur. I take the siddur of a couple rows in front of me. Dad wouldn't just take his siddur. He would walk around the shul collecting siddurim. And we would always tell him, let's go, let's go, let's go. But he would still do it. Why? So somebody else would not have to do it. Lisa, you mentioned at the Hesped about Dad driving you to the city on Motzei Shabbat. Dad used to drive me back to YU also sometimes, and he didn't have to. Vicki and I, when we were planning Aliyah, and I need certain documentation, many times there were a few things, it wasn't the same. I went back to Jewish Agency, and each time they told me, did you fill out the forms? Did you fill out the forms? And then they needed other forms, and I was going to go back to Far Rockaway. My father would meet me in Manhattan and miss out on half a day of work. He did this several times. And I can go on and on with examples. Why did Dad do this? Just to make life a little easier for somebody else. Now, I know these examples might sound small, and I can give you what might be some bigger examples, but I'm not going to, because big examples are a little personal. And also, Chazal teaches us that every couple of generations, Dorot, it's brought down, there might be somebody who will come and perform an act that will make us a big act that will make a significant change. It is very rare. People who try to accomplish and change the world with one big act very rarely accomplish much, according to Chazal. What causes Klal Yisrael to grow, blossom, bring peace, and ultimately to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash are what seems like the small acts, but in reality are huge acts. And this is how we should remember Dad and my kids and nephews, nieces and nephews, Ziggy. I want to conclude with an email my mother sent me a few days ago. Probably the family read it. And I asked Rabbi Danny Nellman, good friends of my parents, if I can just read it. And he was very touched and said, for sure. And so he says, Dear Wiccan family, I'm sorry I cannot be with you, but I will be learning in Jerry's memory. This past week I was learning for a class the second parak in Avot, Mishnah Aleph, which reminded me of Jerry's life. The Mishnah